So you have a house full of kids running around and knock your cup over and it falls on the floor. That's what happened to this cup. No need to panic, we can simply fix it. The first thing that we need to do is analyze the damage. So in order to be able to do that, we are going to have to start peeling back the epoxy. Now we got to use something sharp to be able to start scraping the bottom here. So you want to make sure that your hand is way out of the way and that your tumbler is stable. So I'm just going to use my table and I'm just going to firmly hold that around the bottom there so that way my hand is securely out of the way as I take my box cutter and I start to chip away at the broken epoxy at the bottom. So you just want to be very, very careful, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I hope you guys understand what I'm about to say here. But I keep going until it doesn't lift up anymore. If it's able to lift, then I want to peel it back. But if you can just kind of gently go at it and it's not easily lifting up, then your job is complete. That's how big of an area you need to remove. So I'm going to be doing, there's two sides to this side here that I'm showing you, and then there's another side as well that I'm going to do when I'm not going to remove all of it. I'm going to make it so that way you can see what I mean by you need to make sure that you remove anything that looks white and lifted, because you'll definitely be able to see that after you apply your epoxy. Now, after I have everything all peeled away, I do see a dent on the bottom, but I don't feel that it is hurting the integrity of the tumbler itself. If it was a bigger dent, I wouldn't even be doing this. I would toss it and it's just not even any good anymore. But because it's not too dented, I feel okay with going ahead and fixing it. So as you've seen there, the next thing I needed to do was come through and give it a light sanding. I'm not sanding it really hard. I'm just sanding down the edges of the area that we peeled back that epoxy so there's no sharp edges sticking up. Then I went ahead and got started on that second area right there that I was telling you about, but this time I'm not going to chip away all of the epoxy. I'm going to leave a little bit of it, so when you start to chip it away, it'll continue to stay that solid color of the glitter underneath, but if it's a little bit lifted, it will have a more milky look to it, and that's how you know it's lifted and that you still need to chisel that away to the best of to your ability, because again, like I said, you'll be able to see that outline of what it looks like after everything's epoxied. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing like I did on the other side. I'm going to chip it away and then I'm going to sand it. Now, the biggest thing I can tell you guys is if you're doing this for a customer, you need to really make sure that they completely understand that, number one, you might not be able to fix it at all. You have to be able to inspect it and see what it looks like personally in your hands before you can make that judgment. And you need to make sure that they verify that if you cannot fix it, that you can either send it back to them or you can just go ahead and make a brand new one. And then you can come up with that as to, if they need to pay for it or for the shipping or however you want to handle it. But you definitely need to make sure that you're upfront with your customers and just let them know that for sure. And the second thing you need to let your customers know is it's not going to look exactly the way that it was whenever they first got it. You will be able to tell that it was fixed, okay? So if they're okay with that, they just want to try to save their cup, then again, you can move forward with it as well. All right, now right there where my knife is at, you can see it lift up. You see how it turned that white color. I'm not going to really pick away too much. I'm just going to pick away just a little bit and then that's it. That I'm going to leave that, okay, because I want you guys to see what it looks like under epoxy. So you need to make sure that you get all that lifted epoxy out of there. So I'm going to play it back one more time in slow motion. Look right at the tip where my knife is at, and you'll see that it's going to turn just a lighter color, and that's what you don't want. You don't want that left behind. You need to remove all of that. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and clean this up really good with some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. And then I'm going to prep the area with exactly the same kind of technique that I used the first time around. I'm going to use a black to lay down on the stainless there, and then I'm going to put a black glitter over that. Those are the colors that I'm using. Now, this is where I need you guys to be super duper careful. I'm using a very tiny brush, and I am going to hold it up closer here in a minute. I'll find the part where I do that, but I am just painting inside of the area that I need to re-glitter. You don't want to paint the outside of the epoxy. You just want to push that paint up to the edge of the epoxy. So of course it's going to be a little bit thick. There's going to be a little bit of a lip because we had to pull that epoxy away. So this is already your layers of epoxy. So there's a little bit of a lip, and you just want to gently bring it up to that lip without exceeding over or overlapping over top of it. Because again, it will be noticeable and it will look sloppy. Okay, so you want to be very careful with this part here. Now I'm going to use my paint as my adhesive since it's such a small area. I feel comfortable enough just using my paint for that. I'm going to go ahead and apply my glitter down. I'm going to tap it off really good. And there you can see there that it's nicely filled in. And I am going to take my finger and tap that down a bit as well, just making sure that it's nicely planted into that paint. Again, I'm going to move on to this next area here. I'm going to try to get a little bit closer so you guys can see, but I am just pushing that brush right up to right where the edge of that epoxy is, trying my best not to get it up onto the epoxy lip or over it. If you're using or if you need to use a chunky glitter, I would recommend trying not to get too much of the bigger pieces in there and just kind of sifting it out a bit and using the smaller pieces that are in the chunky. And then of course you can add a little bit of the chunky if needed, or the bigger pieces of the chunky if needed. But like I said, you have to definitely tell whoever you're fixing it for, if it's for somebody else, that it's not going to look exact. But I will do my best to make sure it's nicely smoothed and sealed once more so that way you can use it still. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tap that glitter down too. I'm going to set it off to the side and let that dry fully. It didn't take very long. I only let it sit probably for about 5 minutes. Acrylic paint dries really fast, especially in my garage. It's like 1,000,000 degrees in here already. So now I'm just going to sweep away any extra glitter that's all over the tumbler there. And to level out my areas, I'm going to use UV resin. This will really help out to kind of speed up the process if you want it sped up. If you don't want to speed it up, then just use your regular fast setting epoxy so that way it blends in with the epoxy that you used, because the UV resin, it's a bit clearer than the epoxy that I had on here. So you'll be able to kind of see the difference too in that. But again, it doesn't bother me. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill this in. I don't want to overfill it, but that's okay if you accidentally do overfill it because you can just come through and kind of give it a little sanding too. But I'm just going to take my little daughter tool here and I'm just going to push that UV resin all the way out to the edges and just making sure that it's as level as possible. So I went ahead and did both holes, and again, we're just filling in these holes so that way you don't have to do too much. You can just put one more layer of epoxy over top everything and it's good to go. It used to be I'd have to fill it and there wasn't fast setting epoxy, so I'd have to fill it. I'd have to let that cure for a day and then come back through and give it another coat. It was a process. This literally took me 20 minutes to do, and then of course I used a fast setting epoxy to go over top to cure, but what does that take? About an hour to cure. So I mean it's a much quicker, simpler process these days. Now after the UV resin has cured, I'm going to go ahead and take my sanding block once more, just kind of rough up that area and to smooth out anything that just might be rising up a bit above the UV resin area. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and give it another coating of epoxy. Now, I'm about to show you guys what it looks like with making sure that you chip away all the epoxy versus leaving a little bit of that raised epoxy down there. So I'm going to show you here right now. So as you can see, you can tell that it was still lifted under there, but that's why it looks like that. If you've ever fixed it and it has that look to it, it's because you didn't chip away all that epoxy. Does it affect it still? No, it's epoxied smooth, it's sealed, it should be fine. It's just, the looks, you know what I mean? So other than that's it. That's as simple as it gets. I know you guys got this. If this ever happens to you, I absolutely know that you can do this. If you have any questions, just ask me down below and I will answer to the best of my ability. But I hope you guys have an amazing day and I'll see you guys in the next video.